Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another New Jersey Constitutional Republican virtual conversation. It's my great privilege and pleasure to introduce Mr. Jack Ciattarelli to our audience today. Jack, thank you for joining me.
JR, it's always great to be with you and your listening audience. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. I hope you're staying cool from the air conditioning, but Jack, you're always a busy man. You're always about the state. Tell us where you were today. Didn't you have a couple of engagements? Where were you today?
Well, the day started out with another Zoom call at 8 o'clock with a bunch of donors. And then we had a 10 o'clock breakfast meeting in Somerville, New Jersey, with some business leaders. And then I traveled at 12 o'clock down to Marlborough, New Jersey, to meet with the leadership of an important trade organization. And then it was back home for another 3 o'clock Zoom call with members of the campaign team. And here I am with you at 5 o'clock. It's another day on the trail. I enjoy every one of them.
Well, Jack, it's, what we have to do, we have to get a campaign song. And I think that the campaign song should be the Beach Boy classic, I Get Around, I Get Around, I Get Around. Now, of course, your son Jake is going to want Kashmir rocking Led Zeppelin. But I think we should get the Beach Boys, I Get Around, because Jack, you've been all over the state for over a year, meeting all the organizations, all the Republican groups and organizations. And you've covered a lot of ground, haven't you?
I have, JR, but I'll tell you what, I feel like it's critically important for me to demonstrate the right kind of energy to win this election. And I also want people all around the state, and particularly in South Jersey. The one thing I hear over and over again from people, and particularly Republicans in South Jersey, is don't forget us. Why are we often ignored? Every single one of New Jersey's 9 million citizens are equally important. Every single one of New Jersey's 1.3 million Republicans are equally important. And North, Central, and South are all equally important, South Jersey, to winning this election. So it's my responsibility to get up and down the state, and I'm happy to do it.
Well, Jack, there's no question that you've made your presence felt in South Jersey, and you did the last time you ran for governor. And that's, of course, how we became acquainted. And you came to several of our constitutional Republican meetings, and we really appreciated your presence. And the one thing, Jack, that a lot of people say is that, Jack is the kind of guy you can talk to, and you're a great listener. And a lot of times that attribute isn't prevalent with many candidates and representatives, but you definitely have that capacity to listen. You take in other people's ideas, and who knows, you might implement them, and you get a lot of good ideas when you talk to a lot of people, right?
Absolutely, JR. Just because I'm running for governor and hope to be our governor doesn't mean I have a monopoly on good ideas. Whenever I'm asked what the job of a legislator is, or any elected official for that matter, I always say the first job is to listen. You and I are both fans of President Abraham Lincoln. And anyone who's studied him knows that his time in the White House, he put in 18 to 20-hour days, did most of his written work at night, because he would spend all day taking anyone and everyone who visited the White House to meet with him. In those days, you didn't need an appointment. You just showed up at the White House, said, I'd like to speak to the president. He would meet with everyone and listen to everyone. I think that's why he always came up with great ideas, and why he always showed a great deal of empathy for a great many people.
Yes. And of course, Lincoln's persona and his personality, Jack, is really what's needed within our Republican Party. During his first inauguration address, he talked about the better angels of our nature. And we truly believe, I know you do, and we believe that we need to restore that mentality back into the Republican Party, a party that represents the middle class and represents all New Jersey citizens and all citizens of the United States. And those Republican principles, I believe that you are exemplifying. And of course, looking to Lincoln is so important.
Well,
of course, Jack,
I find great inspiration in Lincoln, JR, and I know you do too. And listen, just because someone is humble, and certainly Lincoln was very humble, does not at all suggest that you're not a strong leader. Being humble, that you listen. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily have all the answers. I've often said this, just because I'm governor doesn't mean I'm an expert in all walks of life that New Jerseyans walk in. I need to hear from people about the different ways to solve our problems. Do I have very strong opinions on how to fix our three major problems? The business climate, the property tax crisis, and the pension crisis? As an MBA CPA, you bet I do. But there's a whole lot of other little problems in New Jersey, and I need to hear from experts who are on the front lines. That takes humility. I'm happy to practice that.
Right. Great. Now, Jack, I want to put you in a little bit of a hypothetical situation, and I hope you're going to be in this situation next year. And this situation would be if you were the present governor, before you were giving considering this pandemic that we're in, would you look at the Constitution, the first article of the Constitution, and when you read that there are certain natural and unalienable rights granted each one of us in acquiring, possessing, and protecting their property, would that affect your decision making on what you would implement as far as an executive order in lieu of the fact that all people have that right to acquire, possess, and protect their property?
Oh, JR, you bet I would. I mean, our state constitution and again, the supreme document, our U.S. Constitution, need to be right there at the side of every elected official, and particularly governors and presidents, and how we go about our governance. And I think in many respects, this governor has ignored that. As a New Jerseyan, as a citizen of this state that we call home, I found it embarrassing that someone like this could go on Tucker Carlson on Fox News and say, the Bill of Rights, that's above my pay grade. That's an embarrassment. He owes the people of New Jersey an apology. People had their rights restricted in the way that he went about these executive orders, all of which issued by fiat without talking to people on the front lines. And just how long does this state of emergency continue, JR? Aren't we now at a point where we're not a state of emergency, having broken the back of the curve, and he should now be consulting with the legislature on how we go about state governance? He's still issuing executive orders. It's wrong, and it's a violation of our rights.
What's amazing, Jack, is that he's doing all of this unilaterally. He doesn't take into any consideration or ask for any input from the legislature. He's not looking into the constitutionality of some of these ideas and these executive orders. And one of them would be the $9.9 billion loan that he wants to take out that the Assembly and the Senate passed the other day. And of course, the constitutionality of such an act is really in question, is it not?
It surely is. In 2004, the Supreme Court agreed with Republicans when Governor Jim McGreevey tried to borrow to balance the state budget. You cannot use the proceeds from bonds. You can't count them as revenue to balance a state budget. And so today I commenced the lawsuit to put a stop to it. And we've put our very best players on the field to go before the Supreme Court and make that argument. But, JR, the other point I want to make is this. At the height of the Great Recession, we had a $6 to $11 billion gap in our budget because of the revenue cliff. And we closed that gap. Chris Christie as governor, working in partnership with the legislature, we closed the budget gap at the height of the Great Recession without borrowing a dime or raising taxes one penny. We can do it again. This governor just refuses to do the belt tightening, refuses to make the hard decisions. I mean, in a time of economic crisis, what employer, what CEO would promise their employees that no one is going to be laid off prior to December 31st, 2021? Not 2020, 2021. Right. Phil Murphy's about the 1%, JR, the 1% of New Jerseyans that work for state government. And he's doing it to the disservice of New Jersey taxpayers.
There's no question about it, Jack. And again, as we see the public sector making out on the backs of the private sector, and it's gone on for many, many decades in New Jersey. And do you think that this can change? Do you think that we could, a rejuvenated Republican Party with Republican wins and gaining seats in the Assembly and in the Senate, a Republican governor, do you think that we can change that mentality and show the public sector that our policies will be better for them in the long run anyway, by improving the economy, creating more jobs, and eliminating further regulation?
JR, if I didn't believe it, I shouldn't be running for governor. We'll be voting not only for a new governor in 2021, but an entirely new legislative map. And I'm telling you, I shouldn't be asking for the nomination unless I believe I have the coattails to produce a Republican majority. And we're going to compete in all 40 legislative districts. I like to remind people I've never compromised on my Republican conservative principles, but 6 of the 7 times that I've won elected office in this state, twice at the municipal level, twice at the freeholder level, and 3 2-year terms in the state legislature, I've term limited myself every time. But 6 of those 7 elections were in districts where Democrats outnumber Republicans. Now,
Right.
that's because we energize all the Republicans. We appeal to the soft Democrats who are very sensitive to property taxes and our business climate and the pension crisis. And we really energize the unaffiliated independent voters that lean right. I say advantage Republicans, particularly since the Democrats have controlled the legislature for more than 2 decades. There's an opportunity here. Let's go forth with a very simple question that Ronald Reagan used to ask when he was running the first time. After 4 years of Jimmy Carter, are you better off? I don't think the answer to that question is yes after 22 years of Democratic control of the legislature.
Yes, there's no question about it, Jack. This is why it's so important that we talk to, and your campaign is reaching out to independent voters and what I call pre-1965 Democrats who are disgruntled with the far left direction that the party has taken. And of course, your message resonates with all because you're talking about middle class, and the Republican Party has traditionally been the party of the middle class. And the Democrats have unfairly painted us as being the party of the upper echelon or the upper 2%, which just isn't true. The Republican principles go back, as Lincoln talked about, and as other Republican presidents talked about, Calvin Coolidge, Dwight Eisenhower, Ronald Reagan, of course, all reaching out to the middle class, which is what you're doing here in the state of New Jersey.
Well, JR, to your point, a great many of the Democrats do live in the suburbs. They're very sensitive to property taxes, as I said, the business climate, the pension crisis. But they also didn't like the idea of a governor that goes around the state waving the victory flag because we've given voting rights to parolees or driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, or because we're declaring sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. I mean, I've heard a great many Democrats, particularly in the suburbs, saying, are those really our priorities here in New Jersey? What about property taxes? So there's a real opportunity here. And I like to remind people, JR, it's been more than 40 years since the people of New Jersey have reelected an incumbent Democratic governor. Republicans have controlled the executive branch more than the Democrats over the past 40 years. Jim Florio, Jim McGreevey, John Corzine were all one-term governors, and the Republicans that took their place were all 2-term governors. The people of New Jersey like governance under a Republican governor.
Well, Jack, let's keep that precedent going next year.
He's
now,
1 and done in 21, JR.
That's a great cliche and very true. And that's what we're all working towards. Now, Jack, talk about the fact that, we have these lawsuits, the NJGOP and Chairman Steinhardt, Michael Testa, all of our Republican leaders have been filing suits as well.
They've commenced mine today.
Right. And you have yours today. Now, what it is, though, we're relying on judges who've been appointed, many by Democrats, who have a totally different philosophical idea of how law should be interpreted. And it really gets down to either the Madisonian school or the Wilsonian school. The Masonian school, of course, talking about the separation of powers, judicial review, the true original intent of law, and then the Wilsonian, which is the evolutionary and the Darwinian and the evolving and the organic, and really gears towards social justice issues, if you will, which of course we long ago saw with Abbott and with COA. But now we're putting these lawsuits in the hands of these judges. Talk about what your litmus test would be in appointing judges and an attorney general once you become governor of New Jersey. What will be your litmus test for appointing these individuals to these
Well, the
very
litmus
important
test would
positions?
be this. We're not going to appoint judges that have demonstrated a certain kind of activism where they're legislating from the bench. Their job is to call
Right.
balls and strikes, not to promulgate laws. And my opinion is that over the past couple of decades, we've got a Supreme Court justice that have really micromanaged issues like Abbott, which is school funding, and COA, which is affordable housing. And look where we are today. So we don't need micromanagers. I know at times because they may be frustrated because the legislature hasn't acted, and certainly the legislature hasn't acted on school funding. It hasn't acted on affordable housing, and shame on the legislature and shame on governors for not pushing the legislature to address those issues. But that shouldn't give the Supreme Court license to be activist judge that end up coming up with the policy. It's the legislature's job to come up with the policy. And then the Supreme Court's job is very simple. Is it or is it not unconstitutional? And with regard to this borrowing scheme, while this Supreme Court leans liberal, there's an awfully compelling precedent from 2004 in Lance versus McGreevy that said it is unconstitutional to count bond proceeds as revenue to balance a state budget. So we will see. Listen, this isn't going to be easy. It's not an easy case. I believe it's a winnable case. But just because the court leans liberal doesn't mean we shouldn't fight the fight on behalf of our taxpayers.
Right, and Jack, it's truly remarkable how politicized the court has become. We were speaking earlier of information I want to show you that the Supreme Court made a statement on June 5th that made some accusations that just aren't true in regards to law enforcement and systemic racism within law enforcement, that the data just doesn't prove to be true. And it's remarkable that a court would be so politicized in this regard. And then, of course, we've seen the current Attorney General, who's been his office is extremely politicized, and it's been since day one, of course, with the leniency and sanctuary city-state policies, handcuffing law enforcement, not working with our immigration federal agencies that are designed to protect American citizens. So we need to move away, obviously, from the political aspects of these agencies. And like you said, our judges need to be evaluating law in lieu of the Constitution, not with an agenda. And that goes for the top law enforcement agency in the state, the Attorney General. And you'll apply that same litmus test to him, I'm sure.
You bet. And by the way, JR, while we're on the topic of judges, I know we all offer our condolences to Judge Salas, whose family in North Brunswick had that terrible situation where the son was murdered.
Terrible.
And the husband was critically injured. These are the times we live in today, but our condolences go out to the family. Hey, JR, here's something that gets me really excited about being governor of the state of New Jersey. Not just about fixing our state, but I will get the opportunity, if I have the privilege of serving 2 terms, to nominate 4 Supreme Court justices. And with a body of 7, that's a new majority. And I will tell you, I will not be using a quota system in any way, shape, or form. The first thing we'll be looking for is people that have demonstrated calling balls and strikes as they see them and not legislating from the bench. But with regard to the Attorney General, I will tell you that I'll look for somebody that certainly has extensive civil and criminal experience because it's a very, very broad position as the state Attorney General. But more than anything, JR, a great administrator. That is the largest department in state government. And it's also in charge of the state police. It needs to be someone who is also a great administrator. I'll tell you one other thing we won't be doing. Even if the president happens to be, unfortunately, not a Republican. I hope the president is a Republican while I'm in office. But, you know, with all there is to do in New Jersey, this governor has had this Attorney General turn around and sue President Trump, I think at least 12 or 13 times. Now, I'm not saying I won't go to bat from time to time on behalf of the people of New Jersey if a lawsuit is in order. But with all there is to do here, why is it every time that Phil Murphy's in trouble, it seems that the Attorney General turns around and sues the president for one thing or another? That's unprecedented.
Right.
And in my mind, unnecessary and a waste of taxpayer dollars.
That's right. And it's also important, Jack, as you know, for the Attorney General to have the best interest of the state police and law enforcement agencies in view. And I believe that there's been a lot of intimidation, if you will, given these agencies from the Attorney General and from the Murphy administration. And of course, Murphy has always been motivated by a social justice agenda. And he's talked about a fair New Jersey, which has become more unfair. And
JR, I couldn't agree more. And I'll tell you one thing that won't happen under Governor Ciattarelli. Governor Ciattarelli and his AG will not be telling local law enforcement agencies. They can't work with federal agencies to address
Right.
any and all issues in their community. I mean,
That's right.
this is unconstitutional in my mind. I mean,
Yes.
we don't allow mayors to go tell police chiefs to achieve a political agenda. The governor shouldn't be telling the attorney general to achieve a political agenda by telling local law enforcement, for example, they can't work with ICE to address illegal immigration in their community. That to me is violating the rights of that community. So you won't see
No
that
question.
under Governor Ciattarelli, and I would hope it would come to an end real soon. We have fought that, and I think we've been successful in pointing it out with this attorney general.
Right. Of course, Jack, the rules of naturalization is an enumerated responsibility of the Congress, according to Article 1. And those laws need to be enforced. Those laws are designed to protect existing American citizens. And we've created this culture or environment of lawlessness with the 7 amnesties that have been granted since 1986. And this has created this environment that is where we have this problem with the illegal immigration. And it's important that we enforce the rules already on the books. Shouldn't we start with that?
JR, there's never been a more important time to enforce the rules on the books. The rule of law is critically important. We're seeing across the country right now lawlessness. Whether you or not you agree with a monument or statue, tearing it down, vandalizing Christopher Columbus statues, vandalizing statues of presidents is lawlessness, and it needs to stop.
Yeah, there's no question about the destruction of property and the people's property. And really, it's incumbent upon law enforcement to keep this from happening. You know, we talk about the constitutional Republicans, we talk about putting the teeth back in the law and putting the fear of God back in the criminal. I mean, the current state that we're in now, Jack, is it seems as though the left look at the criminal as being a victim, as opposed to the victim who they're perpetuating crime on as being the victim. The criminal's treated as a victim. Right. And that needs to be, that's just not common sense and against the laws of nature. Nature's God.
Thank you, JR. And listen, I'm a CPA. There are bad CPAs. We know there are bad doctors. We know there are bad teachers. There are bad professionals in every walk of life, and that includes law enforcement. But this is no time. This is no time to start talking about defunding community policing. If ever there was a time to support law enforcement, this is it. Their job has never been tougher. And if we don't support them, and when I see some of the things that come out of, for example, de Blasio's mouth as the mayor of New York, cutting $1 billion from the police budget in a city of 8 million people, come on, JR. We need to support local law enforcement. Let's have some reforms, but let's stop this talk of defunding and disbanding local police. Let's stop it.
No question about it, Jack. The other thing is the clear dichotomy that exists between us as the Republicans and the Democrats and the left is the Democrats now, from the national level down to the local level, Jack, they're more important on what the person is for a position rather than who the person is for the position. Everything is geared towards identity, racial politics, and this is causing great division. And really, it's dangerous for our American Union. And of course, as the Republican Party, we preserved the Union initially with our founding, and now we see the division and the separation that exists in the country, and a lot of it is being fed by the Democratic Party that are more concerned about what a person is rather than who a person is when it comes to representative government. Don't you think that's
just there are those that are forcing the pendulum to swing too violently in the wrong direction. We need to get back to the ideals that aren't just Republican ideals, they're American ideals. We believe in the individual, right?
Right.
An elitist like Phil Murphy believes that government has to show that it can solve everything by controlling everything. And in so doing creates a nanny state, which breeds dependency and a sense of entitlement. We believe in the individual. When the individual makes responsible decisions to improve their lot in life, it creates a good environment for everyone, right? A tide that lifts all boats. And we believe in liberty, empowering self-reliant individuals with liberty so they can achieve their American dream. And we believe in economic opportunity brought about by free market capitalism, marked by social responsibility, and certainly fiscally responsible and transparent government. These are the ideals that we need to get back to, particularly amongst our young people. It troubles me greatly when I see some of these polls where people are no longer proud to be an American.
Mm.
This is the greatest country in the world. Are we perfect? No, no country's ever been perfect because people aren't perfect. But the
That's right.
ideal of America is perfect. We need to preserve it and work toward it every day as Americans. That's our responsibility.
That's right, Jack. And as you said, that these aren't only Republican principles, but what Lincoln said is that he never had a political sentiment that didn't come originally from the Declaration of Independence. And of course, the Declaration of Independence is the outline, talking about the laws of nature, nature's God, talking about the self-evident truth that all men are created equal. We're all equal under the law. And then, of course, the idea of the consent of the governed, the people consent to be governed as long as the government is fulfilling their responsibility of securing their natural rights, which is the other principle, the unalienable rights given by God, not government, of life,
That's right.
liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So these are all the, no, go ahead.
No, you're bringing a smile to my face, JR, because you and I both know this as students of Lincoln. Listen, in the political world, it's easy to lose your way from time to time. And Lincoln would write and tell people that whenever he would lose his way, he would go and reread the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and he would find his bearings again. That's again.
Right.
And so
that's right.
It's a good lesson for all of us.
That's right. And Jack, you have a lot of energy. It's contagious with the people who you're around and the friends that you make and the people who you talk to. And it reminds me of what can be done. And again, I go back to Lincoln, who said that he who controls the public sentiment controls the political environment. So we have to be with leaders like you, talking and being enthusiastic about these initial Republican principles that go back to the Declaration of Independence, our founding document, and that the Constitution protects, which we have to preserve, that we can change the minds of people who are seeing and are uncomfortable with the lawlessness that they see, with increasing amount of burden with taxation. This whole $9.9 billion loan is going to create another property tax. So we see all these injustices, and that's why it's so important that we need to get to the public opinion and say, listen, Republican ideals transcend time, they transcend place, and they transcend personality, right?
They very much do. And everything you're speaking to right now, JR, is the reason why I've declared so early by historical standards. If I learned anything from the last time around, 7 months is not enough time to get up and down this very large, small state of ours with its 565 towns and its 21 counties. I am so very comfortable with the runway I provided myself this time to get up and down the state and speak to these ideals. Are they ideals that were adopted as Republican principles? Yes. But before that, they were American ideals. And
That's
people
right.
need to be reminded of what our American ideals are and what it means to be an American citizen and how we can, with the application of those ideals, fix New Jersey, which is the slogan for this campaign. Let's fix New Jersey.
Right. And I say we should have "I Get Around" as the campaign song, and Jake wants Kashmir. But listen, Jack, as we finish up, I want to, we are Yankees, right? We are true Yankees in the sense of Lincoln, but also we are New York Yankee baseball fans.
That we are. I want to get what tomorrow is.
That's right. And I want to ask your opinion of what do you think about, the season starting this late, and the idea of having runners start at second base in the extra innings. I mean, tell me what you think of this. I'm very torn. I love ball. I love the sound of that ball hitting the mitt and the crack of the bat, but it's tough with a 60-game season. I mean, there will always be an asterisk by this season, won't there?
Hey, JR, like you, I'm a purist. The game has been around for 150 years, and in 150 years, we haven't changed the length of the base pass. There's still 90 feet. We haven't changed the distance from the mound to the home plate, 60 feet, 6 inches.
Yes.
I'm a purist, so I don't want to see those change. Having said that, it's going to be great to have a distraction to watch Yankee baseball. And I will say this about the Yankees. With the shortened 60-game season, we may have, for the first time in the history of Major League Baseball, a team go undefeated. So it's possible the Yankees go 60-0.
Boy, I hope so. That would be great. That means
You and I and
Mr.
Jake
Cole,
would enjoy that.
yeah, well, we should go to a game, but we certainly do love our Yankees. And real quick, I want to tell you a story, Jack, and the audience. I grew up out in Pittsgrove Township, which you're aware of, and we never had cable television. So we had 3 channels, 3, 6, 10, and 17. And 17 showed the Philadelphia Philly games. Now, back in the 70s, one particular night, and I think the anniversary is coming up very soon, I used to have to go to my grandparents on the weekend to watch WPIX Channel 11 to watch the Yankees, right? And I could only go on certain weekends to go see them. Outside of that, I could never see my Yankees unless I listened to them on the radio. But one particular night, and it was the night that Ron Guidry struck out 18 California Angels. He struck out 18 of them. Miraculously, that game came through on my television set. It was a miracle. It was divine intervention. Of all the times that I was able to get a Yankee broadcast where I lived, which was outside of cable, it was that particular game, and I'll never forget Phil Rizzuto saying, "Holy cow! Another strikeout." So
Louisiana Lightning. Of course, that
yes,
was the year
Ron Guidry.
That was the year Ron Guidry went 25-3. His ERA was 1.7.
That's right.
Won the Cy Young. And we also know that to be the year that the Yankees came back from 14 games down in late July to win the pennant with a 1-game playoff over the Boston Red Sox. But JR, here's the thing that makes me most happy. If ever there was someone who should benefit from divine intervention, it's you. So I'm glad it happened.
Well, I appreciate that, Jack. And the other thing that's interesting is that was the night that when Yankee pitchers got 2 strikes on the opposing batter, that everybody started to get up and they started to clap. And that was the very night. And that's what we're going to miss with this year's baseball, because we're not going to see people in the stands, but so we're going to miss that.
We're going to miss that.
It truly is great to be a Yankee fan. There's no question about that, Jack. And I want to thank you for joining me today. And we want to have you back at least once a month to talk to us, and we'll talk about other issues. There's plenty to talk about. And of course, we wish you all the best. And I thank you for joining me today. And will you come back and see us next month?
You bet I will, JR. It's always a pleasure to be with you. And I greatly appreciate what it is that you do to bring balance to the debate and the discourse here in New Jersey. It's much needed. And I know your listeners enjoy it too. So I'm looking forward to the next time. Thank you again.
Great, Jack. Thank you very much. And Jack, you'll join me in wishing everybody and telling everybody what Lincoln always said was liberty for all. Thank you very much, and have a good night. Liberty for all. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Go Yankees.
Go Yankees.
Take care.
Bye-bye.